I was asked to read for a few minutes from one of my books. So my new book is about a young girl called Amanda, who, with other kids, are investigating some crimes in San Francisco. This is the first chapter. They referred to the first murder as the case of the misplaced baseball bat, so as not to insult the victim by giving it a more explicit name. There were 5 teenagers and an elderly man who met up online to play a role-playing game called Ripper. On the morning of October 13, the 4th grade students of Golden Hill School raced into the gym to whistle blasts from their coach in the doorway. Normally, they would run 2 laps around the basketball court to warm up, but this morning they came to a shuddering halt, shocked by the grisly sight of a man sprawled across a vaulting horse, his pants pulled around his ankles, his buttocks bared, and the handle of a baseball bat inserted into his rectum. The stunned children stood motionless around the corpse until one 9-year-old boy bent down and ran his finger through the dark stain on the floor and realized that it was not chocolate, but congealed blood. A second boy picked up a spent bullet cartridge and slipped it into his pocket, intending to swap it during recess for a porn magazine, while a girl filmed the scene on her cell phone. Just then, the coach bounded over to the group of students and, seeing the strange spectacle, suffered a panic attack. The 4th graders raised the alarm, and other teachers quickly appeared and dragged the children and the hysterical coach from the gym. The teachers removed the baseball bat, and as they laid the corpse out on the floor, they noticed a bullet hole in the center of the victim's forehead. They covered the body with a pair of sweatpants, closed the door, and waited for the police to arrive, who arrived precisely 19 minutes later, by which time the crime scene had been so completely contaminated that it was impossible to tell what the hell had happened. A little later, during the first press conference, Deputy Chief Bob Martin announced that the victim had been identified as one Ed Statton, 49 years old, a school security guard. "Tell us about the baseball bat," a prudent tie-blowed journalist yelled. Furious to discover that information about the case had been leaked, which was not only humiliated to Ed Statton, but possibly damaging to the reputation of the school, the deputy chief snapped that such details would be documented during the autopsy. "What about the suspects? This security guard, was he gay?" Bob Martin ignored the barrage of questions and brought the press conference to a close. At a second press conference, the deputy chief of the Personal Crimes Division explained that the guard was not due to finish his night shift until 6 a.m., but he had left the school around midnight, returning later only to find death lying in wait. Bob Martin's daughter, Amanda, who was watching the press conference on TV, phoned her father to correct him. It was not death that had been lying in wait for Ed Statton, but an assassin. For the Ripper players, this first murder was the start of what would become a dangerous obsession. The questions they were faced with were those that also puzzled the police. Why had the guard not tried to defend himself before being shot through the head? What was the significance of a baseball bat being inserted into such an intimate orifice? Perhaps Ed Statton had deserved his fate, but the kids who played Ripper were not interested in moral issues. They focused strictly on the facts. Up to this point, the game of Ripper had revolved around fictional 19th century crimes that took place in a fog-shrouded London. But when the players agreed to Amanda Martin's suggestion that they investigate murders in present-day San Francisco, another city shrouded in fog, the game took on a more realistic dimension. Celeste Rocco, the famous astrologer, had predicted a bloodbath in the city, and Amanda Martin had decided to take this unique opportunity to put the art of divination to the test. One thing is to predict, that the week is propitious to traveling, and something else to announce a bloodbath. This doesn't happen often in San Francisco. To do so, Amanda enlisted the help of other Ripper players and her best friend, Blake Jackson, who was, coincidentally, her grandfather, little suspecting that the game would turn violent and her own mother would be among the victims. The kids who played Ripper were a select group of freaks and geeks from around the world who had first met up online to hunt down the mysterious Jack the Ripper. Amanda's role was to oversee the game and make sure players respected the rules. But given the impending bloodbath, she allowed herself to bend the rules a little. She moved the action of the game from London, 1888, to San Francisco, 2012. Furthermore, in breach of the rules, she created for herself a henchman named Cabell, a dim-witted but loyal hunchback she entrusted with obeying her every whim. It didn't escape her grandfather's notice that the henchman's name was an anagram of his own. At 64, Blake Jackson, a pharmacist by profession, was much too old for children's games. My dad thinks that Ed Stanton's murder was some sort of gay revenge killing, Amanda told her grandfather. What is he basing that theory on? On the baseball bat shoved you know where, Amanda said, blushing to the roots. Let's not jump to conclusions, Amanda. There's still a lot we don't know. Exactly, Cabell. But in the murder, if the murder was premeditated, why didn't the guy kill Stanton before he drove off? He couldn't have known Stanton intended to come back, said Amanda. Maybe it wasn't premeditated, Amanda. Maybe someone sneaked into the school intending to rob the place and Stanton caught him in the act. Dad says that in all the years he's worked in homicide, he's seen murderers who panicked and lashed out violently, but he'd never come across one who hung around and took time to cruelly humiliate the victim. What other pearls of wisdom did Bob come up with? Asked the grandfather. You know what Dad's like. I have to surgically extract every crumb of information from him. He doesn't think that murder is an appropriate subject for a girl my age. He's got a point, Amanda. This whole thing is a bit sordid. It's public domain. It was on TV. And if you think you can handle it, there's a video in the internet, some little girl shot on her cell phone, replied Amanda. Geez, that's cold-blooded. Kids these days are so used to violence that nothing scares them, Blake Jackson trailed off with a sigh. Now, back in my day, this is your day, interrupted Amanda. It really bugs me when you talk like an old man. So, have you checked out the autopsy, Cabell? I've got work to do, Amanda. I can't just leave the drugstore unattended. It's flu season, but I'll get to it as soon as I can. Well, hurry up, or I might find out myself a new henchman. You can try. Like I would like to see anyone else who's prepared to put up with you, replied Blake. You love me, Gramps? No, me neither, Amanda said, and flung her arms around his neck. Thank you.
There are some questions that students had. What's that? Yeah, okay, I've got some here to start, and then you can bring them up. But I've got some questions that were submitted to me last week from some students, so I thought I'd start with those, and then we can get to the others. I know there are a lot of creative writing students in the audience, so perhaps you can talk briefly about how you began your writing career and your own writing process.
Well, I began writing as a second choice. My first choice would have been to be a chorus girl, but my legs were too short. I have good legs, but short. And I became a journalist first. Then in 1973, we had a military coup in Chile. I had to leave my country, and I couldn't find a job as a journalist. And for years, in Venezuela, all these stories were like boiling inside me. The memories from my country, my crazy family, everything. And so when I On January 8th, 1981, we got a letter that my grandfather was dying in Chile, a phone call actually. And I started a letter for him that became the House of the Spirits. So it happened almost by chance. And the fact that the book was successful paved the way for all the other books. So that was very lucky.
So I imagine everyone here is knowledgeable of your books, but I don't know if everyone here is knowledgeable of your foundation. And so could you talk about the origins of the foundation, its scope and objectives?
Well, in 1992, my daughter Paula died. She was 28 years old. She died of a rare condition. And I wrote a book called Paula, a memoir, that helped me go through the first year of grieving that was pretty bad. And writing that book, I could understand what had happened and accept it. But I didn't want to touch any of the money that came from that book. I didn't want to benefit personally from such a tragedy. So I put all that aside, thinking, what can I do with this that would be something that Paula would like? And eventually I came up with the idea of creating a foundation for empowerment of women and girls. And at the beginning, it was sort of messy because I don't know anything about that. I mean, I don't know how to handle a foundation. I don't know anything about the IRS that is always watching like hawks. And so I was just making checks. But then my son, Nicolas, and his wife divorced. And my son wasn't dating anybody for a couple of years. So I did what any Latin mother would do. Look for a bride. And I was looking for someone that would handle Nicolas and the 3 children, and if possible, also my foundation. So, and I came across Lori Barra, who has the big heart to handle Nicolas and the brain to organize the foundation. And under her management, it has been really successful, because she evaluates the programs, and she's very careful about where the money goes. So we support projects that already exist. We don't invent anything, to empower women and girls in the areas of education, health, and protection. Of course, reproductive rights is part of health. So we do that, and it's really rewarding, because with whatever little money you invest, it's multiplied. You know that for every $20 that philanthropy spends in programs for men, $1 is given to programs for women. Although it has been proven beyond any doubt that the money that you invest in a woman raises the whole family and eventually the community. So the only way that you can change the world is by empowering women. And still, you give the money to men who buy bicycles with it, or watches, or whatever.
From House of the Spirits to Paula, you have written in a wide range of genres, but with Ripper, an atmospheric, fast-paced mystery, you've gone in a completely different direction. So, besides baseball bats, what prompted you to go in that direction?
I don't know much about baseball. And actually, if I think about it, it would be hard to introduce a baseball bat in that place. The whole thing started because I announced that I was going to retire, and my agent panicked, because I support the agency, basically. So she said, no, you have to write a book with Willie. My husband, who was a lawyer, retired and decided to become a writer. Can you imagine? Compete with me? I said, well, when I retire, I will start practicing law. And he started writing mysteries. Actually, he has written 6 mysteries, to my surprise. And so when the agent said this, I thought, well, I have written in so many genres that I can accommodate to Willie, and let's write a crime novel. And we started talking about it. I start all my books on January 8th. So on January 8th, we were supposed to start working together. He was watching TV. And and then he was reading the newspaper, and then he was walking the dogs. Willie has a span attention of 11 minutes. And I work 10 hours a day, I research, and the other thing is that he writes in English and I write in Spanish. So it was never going to work. So I ended up writing the book alone. And it was fun. It was really fun. I loved it.
So is the book out now, or
it will
it's
be out in January.
In January.
In several languages. It will come out in Spanish and English simultaneously.
Ah, okay. A student writes, who was the first strong woman you came across in your life that inspired you to write such strong characters in your novels?
I'm surrounded by strong women. I really don't know any woman who is weak. Maybe they are in some TV series, but I have never seen them. And I grew up in the 40s and 50s in Chile. It's a very Catholic, socially conservative society, and at that time, very patriarchal. It still is. Mm-hmm. But at the time, it was much worse. And we lived with my grandfather, who was the great patriarch. And I saw that my mother, who was the only female in the house, she and I, didn't have any of the privileges of the men, of the freedom of the men, of the income of the men. She always lived with crumbs. And she had no education to work. She had 3 children. She had been abandoned by her husband. I didn't want my mother's life. I wanted to be like my grandfather. I wanted to be like the Godfather, if possible. So the struggle to empower myself and to protect my mother started when I was really young. I had never heard the word feminism, but I was already thinking like that. And nobody knew what the heck was wrong with me. I was never going to catch a husband if I was talking like that. But then feminism caught up with me, because the wave of women's liberation came to Chile when I was in my 20s. And then I realized that I was not alone. Mm-hmm. That was great.
The film adaptation, House of the Spirits, basically eliminated much of the novel's magical realism. The students want to know if you'd like to see a remake of it now that film technology has advanced to the point where that magical realism could be more easily depicted.
I had never thought about that, but I remember that when the movie was made, it was made by Billy August, a Danish director that I respect very much. And the exteriors were filmed in Portugal, and the interiors in a studio in Denmark, in Copenhagen. And they invited Willie and I to see, for a week, to see part of the filming. And one of the many things that we talked about was magic realism, because he said that he was fascinated with it in the book, but it doesn't work on the screen, mm-hmm. because it's like funny. In a book, you can say that the glass moved or whatever, and then when you see it on the screen, it's sort of unbelievable and stupid. And I have one character in the book that has green hair, and Billy August said, the reader can imagine green hair in any shade of green. It could be copper green or it could be emerald green, but I have to put a green wig on the actress, and it will always be a green wig. So there are certain things that mm-hmm. work in literature and don't work in the movies, and vice versa.
So you don't want to see a remake?
It's not of my business really, because they've made all kinds of stuff with my stories, and I don't have any control. Recently there was an opera here in Los Angeles with Plácido Domingo, who directed it, based on one of my stories. And I went to see it, and I was delighted to see what they can do with something that is so flat in a piece of paper. They can create this mm-hmm. whole thing. So it's wonderful to see that other creators are inspired, but that doesn't belong to me.
Right. What moves your soul as a human being? Simple question.
What moves my soul? Anger. Anger at injustice and disparity and abuse and exploitation, at the situation of women and children. war, or that boiling anger that I feel at how the world is and the desire to change it, that I have had all my life, that's sort of fuels me forward. And thank God I've been able to channel that anger in the foundation and my writing. Otherwise, I would have killed somebody already, or many people maybe. Yeah.
What motivated you to write the story, The Wife of the Judge?
What story was that? I don't remember the story. Am I off? Yeah. This thing is screwed up. So let's share it.
All right, we're going to do that.
Yeah. You ask the question and then.
Okay. The question is, how is your own connection to Chilean history imparted, I guess it's imparted your writing? I can't read it very well, but very intimate.
Very intimate. Let me take this thing out. Oh, here it is. I got it. Yeah.
I hope this is on film because.
Yeah. Okay, I got it.
All right. We're good.
Well, first of all, the connection to the recent history is that the military coup that changed my life and the life of my family. So I ended up living as a political refugee, and that, I think, was what triggered the House of the Spirits. The crazy attempt to recover everything I had lost, my country, my family, my job, everything. So that has been a huge source of inspiration for me. And then it's the past, our past history that is fascinating. Chile is what we call in Spanish el culo del mundo. It's where the world ends, the asshole of the world. And so the Spaniards went looking for gold and silver to Peru, to Mexico, to other places, not to Chile, because Chile was impossible to get there. It was separated from the continent by this incredible desert, Atacama, that is the driest desert in the world, and the mountains. So to get there was very hard. Then the Indians were they were great warriors, and there was no gold or silver. So what was the point except glory? And that has always fascinated me because it's the seed of the Chilean character. And I wrote a book called Inés of My Soul that is the conquest of Chile. And I was always fascinated by our history, very different from the history of the rest of Latin America.
What advice would you give to aspiring writers?
I get this question all the time. Everybody that I know is writing a book. 19-year-olds are writing their memoirs. I would tell them that this is like training for sports. When you train for sports, you train every day to create the muscle, and then maybe you can play the game. Writing is the same. You won't sit down and write the great American novel in one sitting. You have to write constantly, every day. It's like falling in love, that you find the place and the time to make love no matter what. The same for the writing. There are no excuses. Keep telling this to my husband.
And that's why he needs an epidural, by the way. I would like to hear again your encounter with Pablo Neruda when you were planning to interview him.
That was in 1973, the same year of the military coup. Pablo Neruda was already, he had won the Nobel Prize for Literature. He was living in the beach in a place called Isla Negra. And it was winter in Chile because it was August, that we have our winter in August. And he called the publishing house where I was working in a magazine And he said he wanted me to go visit him, and I thought he wanted to be interviewed by me. So I thought, oh my God, I must be the best journalist in this country if Pablo Neruda wants me to come all the way to his house to interview him. I had a little car, and so I got my tape recorder and went like 2 hours in the rain to interview him. He had been ill, and that day he was feeling better. So we had lunch, and we had a bottle of white wine. He showed me his collections. He had a beautiful house. If you ever go to Chile, try to see Pablo Neruda's houses, because it's really quite an adventure. And by the end of the lunch, I said, okay, Don Pablo, I have to drive back, and it's a long way, so maybe we should do the interview. He said, what interview? And I said, well, the interview. And he said, I would never be interviewed by you. You are the worst journalist in this country. You lie all the time. I'm sure that if you don't have a story, you make it up. Why don't you switch to literature, where all these defects are virtues? So that was, unfortunately, a month later he was dead. We had the military coup, and 11 days after the military coup, he died. And now it's questioned in Chile if he died of natural cause or if he was poisoned, because they were eliminating in Chile anybody who could in any way represent the left in Chile, and he was a communist.
I guess this refers to your latest novel. What made you write about death and gruesome topics as opposed to what you've written in the past?
Well, I like to try new things, and murder is fascinating. Everybody likes that. Have you noticed? Everybody loves it. If you talk about murder or blood or anything gruesome, people love it. Just love it.
Some of these questions are the same. When did you know you wanted to write?
I always knew that I loved stories. I was a storyteller when I learned to speak. I was already telling stories, and I loved to read. I love stories, but I never thought I could be a writer because there were no models. The writers were men, and the few female writers I had heard of were some British spinsters who had committed suicide. So I didn't imagine that I could be a writer. It sounded sort of arrogant. So when I wrote The House of the Spirits, and then I wrote Of Love and Shadows, and then Eva Luna, and still, when I had to fill a form, I didn't dare say writer. I would write journalist, because it felt weird, like writer was like too much. Now I realize that it's not too much. Usually too little. You have to have another job.
Well, Betty wants to know what motivated you to write the book, The Night of the Spirits.
The what?
The Night of the Spirits. Is this a book you've forgotten?
No. Maybe she's referring to the House of the Spirits. As I said before, I had left my country years before, and I felt that the past and the people were blurred, more and more blurred, like in a fog. I sort of remembered the stories, but more and more I was forgetting. And when my grandfather was dying, I started a letter for him to tell him that I really remembered everything that he had told me about his life. And in the attempt to remember those first stories that he had told me, the other stories came back. And suddenly there was this wave of images and memories. So I didn't have to think or plan the book. It was like almost automatic writing. In that sense, it's the easiest book that I've ever written, because I didn't know anything about literature. I had never read a review. Actually, nobody reads reviews. Only other critics read reviews. I didn't know that there was a mind field called the literary world, that there were professors that taught books and dissected books and destroyed the books. I knew nothing of that, so it was a very innocent book in that sense.
No, thanks for that compliment. What advice would you give a stalled writer, and how have you continued to stay motivated to write and try new genres?
I suppose that means, what do you do when you have a writer's block? Mm-hmm. I have had it once, and that was after Paula died. I wrote Paula, and then I went into a sort of, they call it writer's block, but it's a sort of paralysis of imagination. I would go every day to my computer and try to write. I had ideas, but I just could not put them down. I don't know what happened, but no matter what I tried, nothing worked, and I knew it wasn't working. So that went on like for 3 years. It was pretty bad. And then one day, I remembered that I'm a journalist by training, and if I'm given a subject and time to research, I can write about almost anything except politics, probably, and sports. So I gave myself a subject that would be as removed from grief and pain and loss as possible. And I wrote a book called Aphrodite, which is about lust and gluttony, the only sins that are worth the trouble, really. And I would recommend to this person who feels stuck, look in another direction. When you think all the doors are closed, there is an open window somewhere. And then you go in a direction that is completely unexpected, and maybe it's great. It's like men.
Pardon me?
It's like men. You think that you can only be with this one, and this is it, and then that fails. Look around.
Well, I hope my fiance didn't hear that. So how old were you when you decided to be a writer?
As I said before, I didn't decide. It happened, but I was 39 years old when I wrote The House of the Spirits. I was pretty old.
So let's see. So what is your favorite book that you've written, and why?
I don't remember them. So I don't have a favorite book, but I know which one of my books has had the greatest response from the readers, and that's Paula. To this day, 20 years later, I get emails every day from someone that is reading Paula somewhere in the world in some language.
This is a thank you. Thank you so much for your contribution to the movie Gifts of Grief. It has helped a lot of people.
Yeah, I had very little to do with that book, so thank you for thanking me, but really, I don't have any credit there.
Well, this is a very interesting question. How far do you think that we, women, are from equality?
It will depend on us. We are going to make the change. Nobody's going to give us anything for free. I have been in the struggle for equality for women, and not equality, because who wants to be equal to men? That's not the point. But I wouldn't know what to do with that thing that you have there. You know, my granddaughters say, why do you talk about this thing so much? It's dated. They are privileged. They were born with education, with access to health care in this society where they don't even think that there's a problem because they're not in the workplace yet. They have not gone out into the world, and they have not seen really what happens in this country also. But what bugs me is that they don't see 80% of the women in the rest of the world, where women still are subject to all kinds of abuse and exploitation, where little girls are sold into premature marriage, where they suffer genital mutilation, they are sold into prostitution, women into forced labor, where in places where women have acquired certain rights, something happens, like the Taliban, and in 24 hours they lose everything. In a war, most of the victims are women and children. 80% of the refugees in the world are women and children. So we have a lot to do. And we have achieved a lot, but there's still a lot to be done.
Well, someone wrote a few questions here. The first one is your favorite author?
Me.
And
Yeah,
your favorite author other than you, and why?
It's very hard to say that because there are so many authors I love and new ones are appearing all the time. The competition is ferocious. But I like the books. I mean, if I liked another style or another kind of books, I would write that, not the ones I write. So I'm my favorite writer.
The first book you read, and how old were you when you read it?
I don't remember the first book I read. I suppose they were fairy tales. But I remember the first book that created a huge impact in me. I was 9. And my stepfather, I was a very good reader. My stepfather gave me the works of Shakespeare translated into Spanish, an Aguilar edition. I still have it to this day, all torn and worn. And I was fascinated with the stories. I couldn't quite understand it, but I would draw the characters, cut them, put a match in the back, and move them on the table to get an idea of what was going on, because it was so confusing and everybody died at the end. So it was fascinating. And that was the moment when I realized that if you changed one thing, you could change the story completely. One of the characters that moved in another direction, and the whole story would be changed. And then, many years later, when I was a beginning my teenage years, I was 12, 13, we were living in Lebanon, and girls at the time in Lebanon didn't have any social life. You would go from your house to the school and back, that was it. But I could read. And I had all kinds of books, but my stepfather had 4 secret volumes hidden in a locked closet. So I knew that that was the book I wanted to read. Unfortunately, I was able to open the locks. And so because he was a diplomat, he was always going out. Every day there was a cocktail or some dinner or something. So I would get in there with a flashlight and read 1001 Nights. Of course, I couldn't mark the book, but I was looking for the dirty parts. So I was jumping from one story to the other, and the characters all mixed, and creating my own stories. And the dirty parts were all very metaphorical. And I didn't know the basics, nothing. I had never seen a naked man in my life. So all these poetic descriptions of what was going on in the harem, I didn't get it. But it was still fascinating.
Well, you seem to pick up on that now. If you had not become a writer, what would you be?
What would I be? I told you I don't have legs for chorus girl, and I'm too old for that. What would I be? I don't know. I was probably any menial job, I suppose. I'm unemployable. That's the truth.
This is a very long question. Many people say House of the Spirit is your best work, and that the others are good but not your best.
This is some teacher, some professor.
I'm not going to tell you who wrote this. I loved Island Beneath the Sea. Help me understand, is it your style that changed, the story type that changed, or could there be another explanation that explains why your fans might say that?
Excuse me.
I'm not done.
That bugs me. My fans don't say that. It's some stupid professor somewhere who's asking that question. The truth is that The House of the Spirits is a very different book from the books that I've written recently because the world has changed. Literary styles have changed. I have changed. Few people would have the patience today to write or to read a book like The House of the Spirits because it's too baroque, too many adjectives, too much stuff in it. Today, the world has changed. Things are much faster, and young readers are used to different literature, and people are writing differently. So, of course, the style has changed. And I have lived in this country for 26 years in English. So, English language teaches you to think in a straight line. We, in Spanish, think in circles. So we go around and around and around, and finally we get to the point. My husband, who was a lawyer, 90% of his clientele was Latinos. They were Mexican workers. And he says that he can tell when a letter comes in Spanish or in English without opening the envelope, because the letter in Spanish is heavier. For the same thing, we require 2 or 3 pages. In English, 1 paragraph. So I have learned to get to the point and to choose a good noun to replace 3 adjectives. With a good noun, you don't need the adjectives.